Welcome to part 2 of developing web apps with Python. In this part, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look at passing parameters into the templates. We'll look at creating a login session, getting users to be able to log in with a password and username, and of course we'll look at Python, just an intro to Python to get you started, and enough Python to get you to create to finish the web application that we're going to create. If you haven't, if you don't know what I'm talking about at this point, go back to part 1. Review the basic HTML, the basic CSS, and the basic setup for our bottle app. And once you've done that, we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and look at the contact page. At this point, we just have a simple contact page with a form that we stole from W3 Schools, and we have our home. Nothing fancy is happening on this side of things. It's just a simple, ugly website with a contact me page that takes you to the contact me link that takes you to the contact route. So let's go ahead and look at how we can actually pass in a parameter here. So what I'll do is I'll go to contact, and I'll do some basic Python here. I'll create a variable, and I'll assign a string Victor to that variable. And in Python, you can do it with double quotes, or you can do it with single quotes, or you can do it with triple quotes, or speech marks. So it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna be using double quotation marks. I use that a lot. I'm used to using that, so that's how I'm gonna declare name. And there's no need for anything before that, str or anything like that. It's just name equals Victor. And what I can do now is in my template, I can say comma here, and I can say, let's say name equals name. All right, so I just assigned a variable. Let's call this, just say parameter to make it more visual. Parameter equals name. So we want to pass in parameters. So let me save that, and let me go back to my contact page. And above here, what I'll do is just put an h1 tag, just like we've done before. But instead of saying, welcome, whatever, welcome X, we'll actually say welcome, and then we're going to put in 2 curly brackets and say parameter. Okay, and so when I save and refresh that, and we save and refresh our bottle app, then when we go and actually run the contact page, so let's go back to the main page, and then let's go to, oops, let's make sure everything, let's go to say contact me. It should say welcome Victor. So what we've done here is we've passed in a parameter from a variable called name, and it holds the string Victor. All right, pretty straightforward. And when you look at the rendered version of this, it just looks like welcome Victor. You don't see the double curly brackets or anything that we've done on the back end. So this is how we can start passing information. So let's go ahead and take this to the next level. Let's go ahead and look at our web form, and let's go ahead and get this page to actually kind of like log us in. So what I'll do is I'll explain how form works, which is going to be very valuable, and how input tags and everything works. So first of all, I'm going to remove first name and last name, and I'm going to replace that. Notice the way our page looks. It has first name, last name, and then you have Mickey and Mouse in there. So that's called a placeholder or value. Let's go ahead and say placeholder. I like to use placeholder as an attribute, and I'm going to go ahead and say email, and placeholder will be we'll say email, and then we'll say password. Okay, and the type. So you have the input. This is the tag input. As we learned about earlier tags, the input tag needs attributes, and then some of the attributes that you have is the type. So it could be text, it could be email. So let's go ahead and put email and see what happens. And the name is how we identify this actual input. This is very important. Name is extremely important. So name equals email, and then we'll put password here. So let's see what this does. Type is password. Name will say PW, so we don't get confused between the two, and then placeholder is password. So let's go ahead and look at what this looks like. Let's save it, let's refresh it, and let's look at our web page now. So now we have the placeholder is here, email and password. These are the placeholders, these go into here. And because I made this type as password, it's masking the contents. Okay, and I can actually remove the placeholder because you may not want that to even be in there. So let's go ahead and just keep it as it is, email and password. Actually, you know what I'll do? I'll do this. I'll say text, and we'll put placeholder as password so we can see what's happening visually. All right, so now we have name and password. Okay, so I have email and I have password. Now what I've done here is something called validation in computer science. What validation means is that I'm checking that the data that I'm putting in is of the correct type, like a string, an integer. It's of the correct length. That's another form of validation. That it's not blank. Another form of validation is that it is, you know, it could be type, it could be length, it could be not blank, it could be of the correct, let's say, you know, that it contains certain characters, so that it contains specific characters or does not contain those characters, etc. So these are all forms of validation, and there's a few more. But what we'll do now is just do basic validation, let HTML do the validation for us. And so with type email, it actually allows us to not get passed unless we actually have an email format. Now we can trick it with something ASD.com, for example, and it would still work. So we can validate this later on in a more like in-depth way, but for now, HTML allows us, the input tag allows us to validate, do some basic validation, which is really great. We can also use another form of validation called required. So if I save this and refresh it, and we go back to contact page, if I try to submit without filling that in, it would say you need to fill that in. So that's another form of validation, that it's not left blank or whatever, or that it's a required field. So now you can see we have a basic web form going, and I have my input type, text looks good, everything looks good. If I want to change this to be masked, I can as well by just putting password. And there's other types of inputs, but we'll look at just email and text for now. Another type is called submit, which is going to allow us to actually submit the form. And so you might ask, okay, where is this form going? Well, this form, we need this form to process on the back end somewhere, right? So what I'll do here is I'll start getting into something called a method, into methods. And let's talk about two types of methods. There's the method get, and there's the method post. So a simple search on method get versus post will bring up a few tables that can explain the differences. And definitely go off and explore this more in depth, but let's just go over the very basics right here. So right here we have the get method will pass parameters into the actual URL. So for example, you might see something like this. You might see a URL up on top and it says name equals Victor, and then it might say, you know, type equal or account equals 123 or whatever, right? So you might see the parameters that we've actually passed in from the back end or from the form itself be passed in through here. And that's used with websites that aren't secure. This would never happen, of course, with a post. To get to the point of it, we are going to start using, we're going to use post only and not use get. Post is a secure way to take care of those parameters, keep them secure, keep our passwords secure. And if you press back on a get, or if you bookmark it, you can actually bookmark this exact page with the parameters passed in. And if I press back, nothing happens. If I do the same thing with post, it's going to give me a prompt dialog box that says, do you want to resubmit this form, which I'm sure you've seen many times. That is usually seen on the internet. Post is the most common form of form submission, and it's way more secure than get. So without going too deep into those definitions, we'll go ahead and start using post here. And I'll say method equals post, and now the action is the route that I want to go to. So back in our bottle app, we want to go ahead and create a new route, but instead of creating a normal route, we're going to create a post route. So I'm going to say method equals post, okay? And that should be fine. We have our method equals post, and now we can start using the data from our form. So how do we do that? Well, we have a name email and we have a name password. So we already have some data. So if we just say action equals contact, what it's doing is it's going to target this route. Not this route, but this route, the one that we've set as a method post. And in this route, we can do whatever we want with the variables or the data from the form. So right now we have input type email and name equals email and name equals password. Let's go ahead and get email and password and pass that in and see if it's actually working. Well, first of all, we need to go ahead and create a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say E, just to keep things different. E equals request.form.get. forms, I think it's forms.get, and we'll say p equals request.forms.get. Now we can't use request without actually importing request, so I'm going to actually import something called request, and now we can use the request thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab the data from name. So email and password is what we need. We're going to go ahead and get email, and we're going to go ahead and get password. All right, and we're going to see if this works. We're going to say data is equal to E plus P. So what we're doing here is we're just taking E, some simple Python, create a variable equals E plus P, and then we're going to return, we're going to just return data, okay, to the page. All right, and just see what happens. So let's save it, and let's refresh, and let's save this page, and let's refresh, and let's go back to our contact page, and let's refresh everything and find out what went wrong. Let's see, we have a post, we have an action, form that looks good, input type submit. What have I done here? Contact, that's fine, return template. So let's remove this parameter information from the last part. All right, so now we have that. Let's save it. Oh, let's make sure our contact page doesn't have the, doesn't have the welcome name in there. And let's try it again. So go back to our main page, go back to contact, and now here we go. So let's say vic@vic.com and 1, 2, 3. Hit submit, and we have an error. This is good for us to debug. So let's go back to our bottle app, and let's go back home, and let's open it up, and let's look at our log file, error log, and see what went wrong. Must be string not type, so we not non-type. So right here we have data equals str. We need to convert this to a string, and we need to convert this to a string. So I'll do this first, and I'll explain what I just did. So let's go back and try contact again. This is the main route. Let's say vic@vic.com, and then 1, 2, 3, and hit submit. And now we have vic@vic.com and none. Did I write none? All right, so something went wrong. It didn't grab none, the password. So let's go back and look at what we did here. We said input type is text, name is password. What have we done different? What have we done wrong here? Okay, so instead of saying password, I should have said PW. So let's refresh it, go back, try contact again, vic@vic.com, 1, 2, 3, and now it's passed it in. Okay, so we've actually taken some information from a form, and we can actually start doing some manipulation on it and using it however we want. So let's go ahead and talk about what we just did with string and integers and so on. So let's pop into Replit really quick, and let's do some quick Python to understand what we just did with the string and the integers. Okay, so in Python, if I have a number equals 5 or a number equals 5, these are two different things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say number, let's call this one number I and number S. Okay, so I have these two things. So if I say number, I want to print number I plus number I. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what happens. When I run that, oops, let's go ahead and refresh this. When I run this, I should get a number 10, because what we've done is we've taken a number I, which is just a simple number, and we've added it together. Now, what happens if I say number I, number S plus number S? We should get 55. So what the difference between this 5 and this 5 is that this 5 is a string, and this 5 is an integer. So 5 as an integer is seen as digits. So it's actually seen as individual digits. So it's actually seen as something that you can actually count. The string 5 is actually seen like an image 5, plus another image 5. When you put those together, you end up with 55. So a string and an integer are very different. And what happens is if I try to add a string plus an integer, you're going to get an error. So a type error means that something's of the wrong type, must be a string, not an int. So what I might do there is I might say, listen, I want to convert number S to an integer. So I create a function called, I use the function int. In Python, a function is a keyword followed by 2 brackets. So I might say int, and then inside of that, the argument, whatever goes inside of the inside of the 2 brackets, will be my value, the variable number s. So now when I run it, I should get 10. I could also do the opposite. I could say, well, listen, I want to take number I and convert it to a str, a string. And when I run that, I should get 55. So hopefully that makes sense. All we're doing here is we're dealing with different types, string and integers. And in Python, when you add, or in programming, when you add 2 strings together, it's called concatenation. Concatenation. And when you want to add an integer plus a string, you cannot unless you convert one of them either to a string or an integer. So in this case, it wanted us to be specific that these are strings. So we've converted these to strings, and now when you have 2 strings into a variable in Python, it automatically becomes a string, so we can return that string. And now what we can do is we can do anything we want. We could say in a template, we could pass in data as a parameter, as we did earlier. We could say, for example, return another template. So we could say, for example, let's go ahead and do that right now, so we can give a nice visual example. Let's go back to my site, and let's create account.tpl. And all this web page does is it just says welcome, and then it gives the user's name. So let's call this parameter, and let's close the p tag. All right, there we go. Let's save it, and let's go back, and we're going to return the template account, which we've just created, and we're going to pass in the parameter data. Okay, so let's go ahead and say save. Okay, now we don't want all the data. We just want the email. So we're going to say welcome and then email. So let's run this, refresh it, and run it. And let's go back to contact, the main contact route, and let's just say bob@bob.com, and 1, 2, 3, hit submit, and you should see welcome bob@bob.com. So what we've done now is we've passed in. Notice the parameters are not in the URL. They're not visible, and of course the password is not visible. And what would happen it may have happened the first time, you may have seen it, it'll happen throughout the course, is you'll see the prompt from the browser asking us if we want to save that password, because it recognizes that there's a password that was passed in. So let's go ahead and change this now to password, so we can start seeing that if we haven't already seen it. And let's go back to contact and refresh it, make sure that we've refreshed the entire thing. Let's do it, save again, and refresh. Yeah, make sure so. Okay, good. So we're good to go. And then we're going to go ahead and say bob@bob.com and 3, 2, 1, and we get the prompt. Do you want to save this password? Not now.